Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Practical English Completing the Writing Lesson Examination. During the course of this presentation, we'll be taking a look at the requirements for this particular assignment, which includes writing both a 3 to 5 paragraph composition and a business complaint letter, and we'll offer you tips on completing and submitting your exam. My hope is that today's webinar will ultimately help to clarify the assignment, make completion of the exam a bit simpler, and increase student grades and decrease exam returns. That being said, let's get started. One of your greatest resources is our instructional team. We're here to help you and answer any questions you might have. Your English instructors consist of Elena, who is our senior English instructor. She's been a part of the team since 2006 and a senior instructor since 2008. And Megan has also been with Penn Foster High School since 2006, and I became a full-time instructor in 2014. Long story short, if you need assistance, please reach out to us. We're here to help you. All right, so let's go over your learning objectives. Upon completion of this webinar, you will be able to identify and correctly utilize the 3 major parts of a composition, successfully follow a writing prompt to construct a coherent response, identify and correctly utilize the essential parts of a business letter, successfully construct a complaint that will merit a response, identify and utilize full block style to construct a business complaint letter. And before we continue, a little clarification is necessary. Depending on when you join Penn Foster, this exam may have a different name, the Writing Process Part 2. The name just changed a little less than a year ago, but it's been known as the Writing Process Part 2. Not to worry though, the questions are the same, as is the rubric, which explains how you will be graded, and the instructions on how to upload the assignment. The only change, again, is the title. Let's begin with question 1, writing a composition. There are a few basic requirements for this composition. You will need to respond appropriately to the prompt, write 3 to 5 paragraphs, which includes an introduction, 1 to 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. You must include at least 3 sentences per paragraph, and you must avoid using outside sources. This should be something that comes directly from your mind, something that you create without any research. All right, so let's look at responding to the prompt. The most important step you can take to save yourself a lot of extra work is to be sure you are responding appropriately to the prompt that you've chosen. In other words, you want to be sure that you're answering the question that is actually being asked. To ensure success in this task, pay special attention to the verb in each prompt, as well as what may seem like minor words in each choice. Let's take a look at the prompts now. All right, so you do want to argue for or against the limitation of speed. You're not arguing both for and against the limitation of speed. If you're doing that, you will get the paper returned. Make sure that you're either arguing for or against the limitation of speed limits. Do explain why a certain sport is your favorite. Do not explain the sport itself or any of the particular players. You're explaining why you like that sport. Do compare and contrast driving in the winter versus driving in the summer. Do not only compare or only contrast driving in the winter and driving in the summer. That question wants you to compare and contrast. You're doing both. For option D, analyze the best way to buy a car, mow a lawn, or prepare a meal. Do not use a recipe or conduct research. Again, this is something that is coming directly from your mind, something that you do not need to research or look up in any sort of way. Then part E, do describe a memorable day of your life. Do not choose more than one day or offer an overview of the day. When you're describing a memorable day, you're picking just one day and you're going to discuss it in detail. You're going to tell us what happened. Don't simply just provide an overview, but go into detail and be specific. You're describing your most memorable day. All right, now let's take a look at the physical structure of your composition. The introduction is an important part of your composition. It plays a very specific role in the structure and can make or break the composition overall. This paragraph should catch the reader's attention, state the thesis, map out the points to be covered, and transition into the body paragraphs. And just a point, the thesis statement will tell your reader exactly what your paper is going to argue or really be about. It's the statement that will lead into the rest of your paragraphs. And the body paragraphs are the bulk of your composition and will be contained in the body paragraphs. These paragraphs should provide the supporting detail for your composition and begin and end your actual story. The supporting details will vary depending on which topic you chose. While the introduction houses your thesis statement, the body paragraphs houses the reasoning and evidence that serve to support that thesis statement. And just as you shouldn't underestimate the importance of a good introduction, you should also avoid underestimating the importance of a good conclusion. The concluding paragraph is much more than just the final paragraph of your composition. It plays a very specific role in the structure and can leave the reader with a good or bad impression of your work. This paragraph should reiterate the thesis. Sorry, it seems like my clicker is going a little slow as I'm going over this. Reiterate the thesis, tie up any loose ends, and bring closure to the reader and to the work. And just as a reminder, every paragraph must include the following. A paragraph must include a main idea, a topic sentence, and at least 2 supporting details. And as you see in this little graphic, these 3 components are necessary in order to create a complete paragraph. If you're missing any of these 3, then you don't have a complete paragraph. All right, so you should avoid doing any type of research in order to write your composition. Instead of looking for sample compositions and examples of what your work should look like, you should use the resources available to you, including your study unit, your instructors, and even this webinar, and start writing entirely on your own. When we seek out and view examples, especially those done, quote, correctly, the natural inclination is to follow the example. However, if you do this, you risk inadvertently borrowing ideas and wording, ultimately committing plagiarism. If you simply start writing, you avoid the temptation to copy. This is the best and most surefire way to avoid issues with plagiarism. And I know, like, personally, if I go to a website, sometimes I like how something looks, so it might seem like a good idea to, hey, I'll set my paper up like that. That's actually a bad idea because then sometimes you'll just start copying things and that's not good. So again, just don't visit any websites. Just keep your Word document open and start writing. All right, so let's move on to question 2, writing a business complaint letter. There are a few basic requirements for the business complaint letter. You will need to write a letter of complaint, use the full block style, include the relevant parts of a business letter, not become emotional or argumentative, and avoid using any type of template or form letter, and I'll discuss this in a little bit too. There are some rules for complaining. First, you want to make sure the complaint is to someone who is able to assist you, so it could be a manager or a boss, a landlord. You shouldn't write it to just some, like a cashier, like they wouldn't be able to help you as well as a manager would, or you wouldn't write it to a fellow coworker because they wouldn't be able to help you as much as your boss would, and so forth. So again, make sure that you're writing the complaint letter to someone who will be able to help you. You want to be clear and specific about your issue. Don't be vague. If you're vague, they won't be able to address your concern that well. Try to remain brief, but be sure to provide important details. Remain unemotional, and require a specific action, possibly by a specific date. All of these things may seem relatively easy to do while you're calm, but the situation will surely change if and when you become legitimately upset. Full block style is nothing more than a formatting option for a business letter, and it's actually one of the easier options to use because of its consistency. First, in full block style, every line will begin to the left. There should be no indentations, with the possible exception of the letterhead, which will be centered. Otherwise, everything stays to the left. You're not pushing the tab key, you're not pushing the space bar. Just start writing your letter. Now let's take a look at the required parts of a business letter. The letterhead or return address is your information. Please note that the letterhead is centered while a standard return address is not. Also, a standard return address contains only your mailing address. This means that you're not including your name, phone number, or email address. You can include all of this information only if you're using the letterhead, which would be centered. Then you have the date line. This is the date on which the letter is actually written. If you're making up the details of your letter, be sure that the mailing date makes sense. For example, if you bought a product on March 1st and it broke on March 5th, and you unsuccessfully attempted to return it to the store where you bought it on March 7th, your letter should be dated on or after March 7th. If you date your letter on March 5th when you tried returning it on March 7th, that wouldn't really make sense to the person reading your letter, because they would be like, why is this letter written earlier than when he tried returning it? So again, details are important. Then comes your inside address. This is the mailing information for the recipient. You want to include a name or at least a title whenever possible so that your complaint can make its way to the correct individual who is able to assist you. So for instance, if you're writing a letter to a restaurant and you don't necessarily know the manager's name, you wouldn't write, you'd want to write at least like Dear Manager and not just Dear Sir, because that's not specific. If you write Dear Sir, that could be anyone who works there. Then you have the salutation, which is the hello within your letter. If you have the person's name, you should address Dear Mr. So-and-so or Dear Mrs. So-and-so. However, if you only have a title, you can use To Whom It May Concern or Dear Sir or Madam. And again, as I mentioned earlier, you do want to be as specific as possible. So if at all possible, avoid the Dear Sir or Madam or To Whom It May Concern and try to be more specific. Then comes the body. The body of the letter explains your actual problem. You should provide as many details as possible so that the person you're writing to will be able to assist you immediately. Keep the letter as brief as possible and try to stay unemotional. And finally, you have your complimentary close and signature block. The complimentary close, much like the salutation, is the hello within your letter. The complimentary close is the goodbye before you sign off. When in doubt, sincerely is perfectly fine and a good choice. Then the signature block would be where you include your signature line, space for your signature line, and then your typed signature. All of these things, including the signature, must be present for the signature block to be complete. For the signature, most students opt to simply change the font to a script font in order to indicate that a signature would be present. That works just fine. So when you leave that blank area, make sure that you go back to it and change the font to like some kind of script and type your name again. As long as it looks different than your typed name, that's fine. Right, so if you want help, think of a situation as if you were receiving the letter before you send it. If someone sent you an angry letter, would you want to reply to it? Since the object of writing a complaint letter is to get results, writing an angry or argumentative letter is counterproductive. Stay calm and relay your issues as nicely as possible. Yes, form letters are used often in the real world, but the point of this exam is to make sure that you understand the structure of a business complaint letter, so using a form letter is, well, it's a bad idea. Here are some reasons why you should avoid this practice, at least for the purpose of this exam. It is not the same as writing an original letter. It requires no consideration for wording or formatting. It does not create an original complaint. It is simply a fill-in-the-blank exercise. And it does result in plagiarism because you are borrowing someone else's work. Since you did not create the form letter, you're taking it from wherever you got it from, and that's stealing it. You're not coming up with it on your own. Right, so before you submit your work, please do a final check to be sure that you have met all the requirements and followed all of the instructions. Here's a checklist that may help. Before you submit your work, ask yourself the following. For the composition, have I included an introductory paragraph? Have I have I included from 1 to 3 body paragraphs? Have I included a proper conclusion? Have I followed the prompt and answered the questions? Have I written from my personal opinion and experience? Then for the business complaint letter, have I included the required parts of a business letter? Have I directed my complaint to an individual who can help me? Have I supplied ample details and made a clear complaint? Have I written the letter using full block style? And have I written the letter from scratch and avoided to use a template? If you can check off each of these items rather, you're likely ready to submit your exam. If any of these are unchecked, then you have some work to do. And then here are some helpful resources you may want to consider in completing the exam. And I will send these links in a follow-up email that you will receive for this webinar, and you can let me know if you have any other questions after reviewing them. I will be sending my contact information out to you as well. And again, these are some just writing tips, and the Purdue Owl is a great website which will it's very informative with MLA and writing the writing process in general and so forth. You could go through these links though and check them out. And then at the bottom you can see I have a couple links about plagiarism which will help clear up any questions you may have on what exactly plagiarism is or how to avoid it. But the real simple answer in avoiding plagiarism is just not to use any resources. And again, for this exam, you don't really have to do any research or use any resources. As I've been saying, this exam is something that you should create solely on your own, and the questions really don't even require you to do any research. They're general enough that you could just come up with something on your own. All right, now it's time for a little quiz of sorts. And I would like for you to go to the website www.socrative.com and then follow the instructions below. You'll click on Student Login, type in pfsean122, and then when you see the questions, take your time and answer them as best as you can. And remember, this will not count toward your grade. This is just to see how much you comprehended from the webinar. So I'll give you a minute to get that address open. All right, and so far I'm not seeing any students in the quiz, so make sure you're going to socrative.com and then we'll start the quiz. All right, so question 2 says, as long as you answer part of the prompt for question 1, in addition to completing the letter of complaint, of course, your exam will be evaluated and given a grade. All right, and you're picking either A, true, or B, false, and it looks like everyone answered the question. All right, so let's see. The correct answer was true, or I'm sorry, it was actually false, but someone did pick true. This is false because the question says as long as you answer part of the prompt for question 1, your exam will be evaluated and given a grade, but that's false because you have to answer both parts of you have to answer the prompt completely. You can't just, like for instance, if you're doing the compare and contrast driving in the winter, you have to do both. You can't just compare it. You have to contrast it as well. Okay, so let's go on to question 3. In addition to catching the reader's attention, your introduction should state the blank, which informs your reader what your paper will be about. What do you call that? The thing that states what your paper will be. I'm looking for one specific term which we went over during the webinar. Okay, I see main idea or thesis. I'm waiting for a couple more students. Okay, another main idea or thesis. Or, I'm sorry, main idea of your essay. And what does the last student think? All right, I'm not sure if you're still attentive, but we'll go over the answer. The correct answer I was looking for is thesis. That's the main idea is something that you're looking for in the paper, but the technical term that I was looking for is thesis. And then I have a little helpful advice down here. Remember that your thesis statement tells your reader what you'll be discussing. After providing your thesis, you should then provide the points that you'll cover throughout your composition. All right, great job, everyone. Okay, question 4. There's only a couple more, I think. It is important not to use a template or form letter when constructing your letter of complaint. Is that true or false? A, true, or B, false? It is important not to use a template or form letter when constructing your response. All right, all 3 of you answered, so let's see how we did. The correct answer was true, which looks like 2 of you chose true and 1 chose false. All right, so remember, a template is something that someone else created, so by using it, you're essentially taking their ideas. It's basically a fill-in-the-blank exercise and will result in plagiarism. And we do issue plagiarism for students who use a template, so definitely make sure you do not do that. Remember, the work that you do must be all done on your own, and it must come from your own head. You shouldn't look anything up or use any other resources or do any research. And then question 5 says, your letter of complaint must be written in which style? Your letter of complaint must be written in which style? Is it A, simplified style, B, modified block style, or C, full block style? And this one here should be easy because we only discussed one of them in this lesson, in this webinar. All right, so let's see. We should all have picked C. All right, it looks like 2 of you picked C, full block style, and then someone picked A, simplified style. The correct answer is full block style, and again, we didn't go over what simplified style is, so don't do that. Full block style would be when you keep everything except for maybe the letterhead left aligned, and then if you do include a letterhead, that would be centered, and in the letterhead that's the only time that you can include things such as your name or email address or phone number. But otherwise, when you write your return address, all you're doing is including just your address. And then question 6, which is the last question. You should indent the paragraphs of your complaint letter. Is this true or false? And if you were paying attention, I just told you the answer. You should indent the paragraphs of your complaint letter. True or false? And then we all, of course, picked, we didn't all pick the correct answer. The correct answer was false. You should actually not indent the paragraphs of your complaint letter. Otherwise, you're not doing it in full block style. And then, again, I have the note down here. When using full block style, everything must be left aligned. The only exception is if you're using your letterhead, in which case the return address would be centered and at the top of the page. So if we don't have any questions, I'll assume that there are none, and I will conclude the webinar.